Welcome to today's briefing, co-hosted by the Federal Trade Commission, the leading federal agency charged with protecting the public from deceptive or unfair business practices and from unfair methods of competition. It does this through law enforcement, advocacy, research, and education. The FTC has worked with our agency, first with New American Media, now with Ethnic Media Services, for almost a decade to diversify its communication reach. And we're especially pleased to have them co-host today's briefing. We have breaking news today. Early this morning, the FTC released its data on nationwide fraud in 2023. Our FTC experts will break down the data, which is based on reports from consumers, and discuss its efforts to protect the public. Our speakers include Mayo, Acting Associate Director for the FTC's Division of Consumer Response and Operations in the Bureau of Consumer Protection. Don't worry if you didn't catch that full title. We will be sending the expanded bios for our speakers after the call. Ms. Mayo will talk about the top scams of 2023, what's changed, and the newest trends in scammer tools and payment methods. Lois Greisman is Associate Director of the FTC's Division of Marketing Practices. Ms. Greisman will talk about why consumer reporting is so crucial to the FTC's work to protect the public, and offer examples of impersonator scams, including, I hope, calls that often mimic voices through AI. Larissa Bungo, Senior Attorney with the FTC's Division of Consumer and Business Education. Ms. Bungo will talk about where people can find consumer education materials and how to report scams. We ask speakers to speak slowly, as I'm doing, for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. We ask reporters, please enter questions in the chat, and our speakers are encouraged to answer questions throughout the conference, also on the chat. And for that, we welcome both Jennifer Leach and Rosario Mendez as our frequent allies in these conferences for the FTC. We will send a video of today's briefing along with a copy of the press release and the expanded bios with contact information for each speaker later today. And remember, Rosario gives fantastic interviews in Spanish, and our other speakers are also really generous in setting up times if people want to arrange for personal interviews. We will send video excerpts of the presentations early next week. And now for our first speaker, Mayo, Federal Trade Commission. Ms. Mayo, you are giving us the breaking news. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. So, hi there. I am Maria Mayo. I head up the FTC's Division of Consumer Response and Operations, where we manage and process the vast number of consumer reports that we receive through our call center, our online complaint forms, and a host of data contributors. We also maintain the Consumer Sentinel Network, the database where all of the consumer reports that we receive are stored and made available to law enforcement. Today, I will be discussing some of the highlights and trends that we saw in the 2023 data, with a particular focus on the fraud reports that we received. Next slide. One of the main highlights of 2023 is that for the first time ever, consumers reported losing $10 billion to various frauds and scams. This is an increase from the $9 billion in losses reported in 2022. But the number of reports we received in 2023 did not increase dramatically. 1 in 4 consumers reported losing money, with a median loss of $500 per consumer. Next slide. Here are the top 5 most reported fraud categories. Number 1 is imposters, which are scams where someone is pretending to be a trusted entity. It could be a business, a government agency, a family member, or even a romantic interest. I will provide more details about this category shortly. Number 2 is online shopping and negative reviews. And rounding off the top 3 is prizes, sweepstakes, and lotteries. These top 3 fraud categories have remained the same since 2021. Number 4 is investments, which I will cover in a little bit. And coming in at number 5 is business and job opportunities. Next slide. The imposter category consists of 5 subcategories: business imposters, government imposters, romance scams, tech support scams, and family and friend imposters. People reported being confronted with a business imposter scam more than any other type of imposter scam, and we have seen the dollar amount lost to this particular scam steadily increase over the past 3 years, with a staggering $752 million in losses reported in 2023. Next slide, please. Here is an example of a business imposter scam. A consumer receives what appears to be a banking alert about fraudulent activity with their bank account and is given a number to call. The consumer calls the number thinking it's their bank, and it's then transferred to a U.S. Marshal because of the fraudulent activity going on with their account. To convince the consumer that he is an actual U.S. Marshal, the scammer tells the consumer to search his name on a government website to verify his identity. The fake marshal then tells the consumer that their money is in danger because of a money laundering scheme. The consumer ends up withdrawing funds from their personal checking and savings accounts and transferring them to a secure crypto wallet that the marshal set up to protect the money. It is a scam, and the consumer loses everything. Next slide. Government imposter fraud was the second most reported type of imposter scam. In fact, the losses to FTC imposters skyrocketed in 2023, with a median loss of $7,000 compared to a $3,000 median loss in 2019. Next slide. Investment-related scams is number 4 in the list of the most reported frauds. However, it is the category where people reported the most losses. Consumers reported losing $4.6 billion to investment scams, with a median loss of over $7,000. The dollar amount lost in this category has also steadily increased since 2021. Next slide. Here's an example of an investment scam. The consumer was in contact with a woman who promised to teach him how to invest because he didn't know anything about trading and it was his first experience. Consumer transferred $10,000 from his account via bank wire. Since he was able to withdraw the first profit, he really thought this woman was helping him and he trusted her with all of his money. It was a scam. Next slide. Another highlight of the 2023 data is regarding the contact method or how scammers reach out to people. Email was the most reported method in 2023, and this is the first time ever that email has been the #1 reported contact method. In 2022, text was the #1, but before that, phone calls was always #1. Next slide. Even though phone was not the most reported contact method in 2023, people who were contacted by scammers by phone reported higher median losses, with a median loss of $1,480. But overall, consumers who reported that the fraud started on social media reported losing the most money, to the tune of $1.4 billion. Next slide. The last highlight I want to mention is how people paid scammers. People overwhelmingly reported the use of bank transfers and cryptocurrency, especially in frauds involving investment advice and romance scams. People who paid by bank transfers reported losing $1.9 billion, while people who paid by cryptocurrency reported losing $1.4 billion. In 2023, fraud losses topped $10 billion, the first time ever that we have reached that benchmark. Our annual Sentinel data book was released today. It includes information regarding fraud reports we received as well as identity theft. Thank you for allowing me to share some of the highlights from that data.
Maria, that was such a really clear and helpful overview of the data released this morning. Thank you so much. We would like to send the slides, share them with our colleagues on today's call. And one question on the chat that I think is pertinent. The FTC has offered language access for reporting scams as of 2023 in multiple languages. And maybe you could speak to that, or perhaps we'll wait for Larissa. There is a question about whether there are people at the FTC who might be able to do interviews about this data in languages other than English and Spanish, and specifically in Urdu or Urdu or Hindi. And my suggestion is that you use the slides that Mayo has provided and translate them yourselves, because I don't believe that the FTC can provide that number of linguistically fluent experts. But correct me if I'm wrong. This whole briefing is meant to reach exactly these in-language audiences who would otherwise have a hard time accessing this information. Maria, or perhaps Rosario, you want to weigh in on the language fluency issue?
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone at the FTC that speaks those languages and that can give you an interview. I'm happy to give you an interview in English, and I'm sure Maria will too. I can give you an interview in Spanish, but I don't know that that will help you. Sandy is correct that when she shares the slides after the briefing, you're welcome to translate them in your language and use them in that way. The images and anything else that you see in this briefing that we put out in any other information in our websites.
Great. We have a question for you, Maria, from Sunita. Do you want to ask your question, Sunita?
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah. Maria, do you have any data on student loan scams which are proliferating?
We do have that data. I don't have it available now, but it should be available in our data book that just was released today.
And in order to access the data book, the link is in the press release, or should we go on the website to access it? Maria, is the easiest way to access the data?
The link, yes, the link is in the press release.
Great. Okay. The question I have is kind of a personal question. What surprised you the most about the data you collected and analyzed this year versus last? What was the most surprising aspect of the data you found?
Most surprising to me was the dollar amount lost, because I thought last year's was staggering at 9 billion. So I was really surprised to see that we had surpassed that mark and we were at $10 billion, even though the number of reports didn't change that much from 2022 to 2023. I think that was the most eye-opening for me, as well as for the first time, email being the contact method for consumers, how they were being reached by scammers. And that was mostly driven by consumers getting emails from someone claiming to be with business imposters like a Geek Squad and that sort of thing. So those two things were the most surprising to me.
I know we're going to hear more about examples of imposter fraud from our next speaker, but I'm also very curious why you think the amount of losses is going up per report, as opposed to the number of reports going up and then sort of averaging out. What is dramatic is the increase in money lost, even though there hasn't been a dramatic increase in the number of reports you've received. Do you have any insight you can share with us about why that is the case?
I think we started to see it's driven by the increase in the dollar amounts that people are losing in investment scams and, paying out money through bank transfers and cryptocurrency. We're starting to see a big increase in that. Most recently, we also saw a huge increase in the dollar amounts that people were paying out who were affected by FTC impersonator scams. In the number of reports per se, a large increase, I should say. We are seeing people put out more money to scammers.
And one last question. There's some wonderful questions on the chat. We don't have time to take them on the Zoom call, but we hope our speakers will monitor and answer the ones you feel are most relevant to your expertise. This question is from Pilar, which is, are there examples are scammers in a way specializing in ethnic communities regarding the type of scam and the kind of cultural and linguistic fluency that goes with targeting those audiences.
I think Lois is going to cover some of that. So why don't we pass it on to Lois so she can
Okay.
Thank you.
Maria, you have just whetted our appetite for a whole lot more. Thank you, and please stay on the call. So our second speaker, and we welcome her back from numerous briefings she's been on with us, is Lois Greisman, who will, I think, be very helpful in talking about why consumer reporting is so crucial to the FTC's work and provide examples of impersonator scams. Ms. Greisman.
Thank you, Sandy, and hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here to have this opportunity to chat with you for a little bit. Let me pick up right where Sandy mentioned. Why does reporting to the FTC matter? It matters. You've heard lots of data from Maria. There are lots of numbers. There are lots of different types of data that we look at. It matters for two main reasons. It supports our law enforcement work, and not only our work at the FTC, that Consumer Sentinel database that those millions and millions of reports go into are available to nearly 3,000 state, federal, local law enforcement entities across the country. So it's a huge treasure trove of data supporting law enforcement. It also supports our strategic planning and our outreach. What do we do with this data? So when we see, for example, that gift cards become a payment instrument of choice by scammers, and we see huge spikes in those numbers, then we can reach out to industry and see what they're doing and see what more they can be doing to curb abuse of gift cards. When we see, for example, text messaging becoming a more important, more frequent point of initial contact for consumers, we can reach out to the telecommunications industry and say, you have a problem. What are you going to do about it to help consumers? We mine the data. We use it to develop law enforcement leads. In particular, and this touches upon the question that was asked, we have a team that looks on types of scams that might be targeting or disproportionately impacting communities of color. Two real-life examples: an entity called Ganadoras that we sued last June. It was targeting Spanish-speaking consumers, promising financial freedom with proven strategies to teach you how to make big money investing in real estate. Took in some $6 million from consumers. Enormous harm. Another example, a company called BINT, which stands for Blessings in No Time. It's a blessing loan, which is really a type of investment scam. It was targeting Black consumers. We shut it down. They were promising 800% returns on investments. In reality, there was no there. It was simply a recruiting scam. The only money that came in was money that came from the person, your neighbor, your friend, your family member, whom you recruited to join this. There too, millions of dollars lost. Let me shift back to impersonator scams because of the pervasiveness, the prevalence of them, and the huge impact. Maria gave you the really two big categories: government impersonation, business impersonation. Government ranges from on the Immigration Service, on the FBI, Social Security, IRS, to the local sheriff's office, to the local police department. On the business side, banks, Federal Express, Amazon, UPS, I bet everyone on this call probably has received a text purportedly from Amazon or maybe from Geek Squad. They are persuasive. And, these scammers are really good at what we're doing. And one of the things we worry about is the use of artificial intelligence, AI, to, as they say, quote, turbocharge fraud. And we're seeing that along lines of impersonation. So imagine the relative, say aunt. Scammer can easily get a snippet, a couple of seconds of your aunt's voice. From that, they can actually clone it. And the cloning technology is really quite good. And before you think, why is there cloning technology? It was developed for medical reasons. People can lose their voice to accident, to illness, and they still want to be able to communicate in their own voice. And it's been very effective for that. Unfortunately, it's also effective for scammers, because it's one thing to receive a call saying, your aunt's been in a terrible car accident. She's in the hospital. There's no information on insurance. What we need you to do and she needs surgery right away. We need you to wire money to us. And we need thousands of dollars for this life-saving surgery. Think of a twist on that, which is, it's your aunt's voice, cloned, but it sounds exactly like your aunt. She's asking for money. It's her voice, sounds like her. The inflection is like hers, and she's asking for the money. You then have a turbocharged impersonation scam. And what we're seeing with AI, it's not just limited to voice cloning. AI is seeping into scammers' messages that the secret sauce that I have, which will enable you to invest in cryptocurrency, is proven to work because I use AI. I have trained the AI to beat the stock market. And with all the hype around AI these days, that's a very compelling claim to make. And we've already sued some entities making such claims. Let me shift gears now to, I think there have been some questions about, how do you spot this? I mean, how do I know if it's not the police department, if it's not the IRS? And one of the best ways is by what payment instrument they're asking you to provide them with money. Wire transfers, think Western Union or MoneyGram, bright red flag. Cryptocurrency, bright red flag. Gift cards, bright red flag. And again, if the insistence is on pay me by some sort of app, maybe Cash App, maybe Venmo, also red flags. Scammers like these payment methods because it gives them the greatest measure of anonymity. And they are most harmful to consumers because law enforcement's ability to trace the money is extremely difficult, which means the likelihood of getting it returned is extremely difficult. So anyone who is insisting on payment, doesn't matter how they reached you, whether it was text, phone, email, if they're insisting on payment by wire transfer, gift card, payment app, or cryptocurrency, that is a huge bright red flag. I think I will stop there and see if there
are lots of questions, but let's take just a few, and hopefully you can respond to others on the chat. I will ask you the same question I asked Ms. Mayo. What surprised you you are a longtime veteran, all our speakers are, of FTC data books, and you watch these trends very carefully. What surprised you in the 2023 report?
Email, same as Maria. I was really taken aback. Text messaging had been on the rise significantly, and text messaging made enormous sense to me. Lots of people don't answer their phone anymore unless they recognize the number. I mean, that's just our nature. Unless my phone is also my business, unless my personal phone is my business phone, a lot of people will not pick up the phone anymore. But people read texts, they open them. And at least in my experience, though, people within a certain age group, skewing younger, maybe the 20 to 40, much less interested in emails. Might get to them at some point during the day, but it's not top of mind. It's not necessarily pinging in your ears or in your hand. So I found that very curious. Also because the screening of spam by the internet service providers tends to be pretty good. It's gotten much better with robocalls. It's not that good right now with text, but with emails, it's good. And as Maria pointed out, interestingly, we're seeing a lot of impersonation scams come across by email. The sense of urgency isn't nearly there the way it is with a phone call or a text. So I was surprised.
But that our accountant in our office received an email from, quote, his bank, unquote, and honestly said there was fraudulent activity. He needed to get in touch. And this is the most sophisticated accounting expert I know. And John, this was just yesterday. I almost asked him, if you're here, will you share your story? He found a reason to disbelieve, and I will ask him to write up his experience and send it as a consumer report. But it just reinforces my own experience, which is always to feel I'm guilty of something. So when I get this email saying you absolutely have to call this number to correct whatever happened, I tend to fall for it. But now, much more caution. I want to take one question before going to our last speaker, and then we'll have time for more questions. Ramon Cisneros, do you want to ask your question? And if we can't get to you,
yes.
Oh, great, Ramon, thank you.
Well, I am concerned to the fact that we talk about what our readers can do to prevent being scammed. But it comes to my mind, what are we doing to keep people from scamming others? And my question is, do you have any data of people that have been arrested, people that have been punished for scamming? Or can you talk to us a little more about the characteristics of these scammers, if they are overseas, if they are locally, etc.?
A lot there. So Federal Trade Commission is a civil law enforcement agency. I could give you lots of statistics on the number of companies we've shut down, the number of voice over internet protocol service providers that handle those calls that we've shut down, the amount of money we've gotten from them, how many individuals were sued, how many companies were sued. We often will refer those cases to the Department of Justice or to local law enforcement for criminal prosecution. We have a unit that is focused on either parallel or subsequent criminal prosecution, because I think we get good deterrence from shutting down companies We get good deterrence from banning people from taking away their ill-gotten gains when they ripped off consumers. But no deterrence is comparable to arrest and prison. That's the practical matter. In terms of where are the scammers, Ramon, they're everywhere. Yes, there are many offshore. India, Cambodia, Laos, Pakistan, Jamaica. We do see a fair amount of fraudulent activity from there. They're also all over the US and Canada. You know, so our challenge is to stay on top and to do as much as we possibly can.
Are there agencies in Latin America that are tracking these scams the way you are? And are there agencies in Asian countries, for example?
Yes, we meet with our foreign counterparts. We do so a couple of times a year. Certain countries have stronger interest in consumer protection than do others. That's just the nature of the beast. But I assure you, we have lots of discussions with India, for example, in particular, because historically and still to this day, we see significant telemarketing fraud, including impersonation fraud, emanating out of India. And they have arrested people. They have shut down what's called telemarketing boiler rooms.
Right. Well, this prompts me to want to commission a story interviewing our FTC colleagues for a future piece on just what the whole landscape of fraud looks like globally, because so many of our media have binational audiences. So let's go. You can see each of our speakers leads to so many more questions, but we want to go now to our third speaker, Larissa Bungo, who will highlight where people can find consumer education materials and how to report fraud. Welcome, Ms. Bungo.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It's really a privilege to be here today. And hello, everyone. I am Larissa Bungo. I'm an attorney with the FTC's Division of Consumer and Business Education. And as you heard eloquently from Maria and Lois, you heard about the importance of reporting scams. It's so important to our work fighting fraud. Education and awareness is also so important. On the reporting side, it's so important because we can only bring cases and do education and outreach about the scams that we know about. We want to encourage people to report what they see and experience so that we can stop the scams and warn our communities about them through education. I think personally, together we can make a difference in reducing scams. And we are so grateful for your time today and your help sharing the information with the communities that you are a trusted resource for. One question that came up earlier was how to report fraud in multiple languages. So I want to assure you that yes, the answer is yes. People can now report fraud, scams, and any bad business practice that they see in their preferred language. To report fraud, call 877-382-4357. Press 3 to report and get help in your preferred language. The phone lines are available between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time. For those who prefer to report online, they can do it in English at reportfraud.ftc.gov or in Spanish at reportefraud.ftc.gov. And I'll thank my colleague, Rosario Mendez, who I know will be adding information that I'm sharing with you in the chat. When people report fraud, they can report as little or as much information as they want to. For example, they can also do it anonymously if that is a concern. We are interested in knowing what happened. We want to know the story. We also take identity theft reports in multiple languages. To report identity theft and to get help on what to do next in your preferred language, call 877-438-4338 and press 3 to speak to someone in your preferred language. Again, the phone lines are open between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern. We also offer the online option to report identity theft online in English. Go to identitytheft.gov, or in Spanish, visit robodeidentidad.gov. To help people spot scams and talk to others about what they experience, we offer information in 12 languages at our website, ftc.gov/languages. At the website, you'll find information like our resource, How to Avoid a Scam. It mentions some of the things that Lois talked about, like the payment method that can't be traced. It includes general advice on how to detect scams to avoid them. And we offer specific guidance with our resource, What to Do If You Paid a Scammer, so you know what to do right away and who to contact to try to get your money back. At ftc.gov/languages, we also offer guidance for small businesses and information for refugees and immigrants to help those communities spot, detect, avoid fraud. And I'm happy to share that we have a new resource on spotting, avoiding, and reporting identity theft in your language. This resource helps people to learn what identity theft is, how to spot it, and what they can do to protect their identity, and where to go to report it and get help. All of the information is available online at ftc.gov/languages. The languages include Amharic, Arabic, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, French, Hmong, Korean, Russian, Somali, Spanish, Tagalog, Ukrainian, and Vietnamese. From the webpage, it is easy to download each of these publications, easy to make copies and distribute them, or share the links to help communities spot and avoid scams and identity theft. And we know that some people prefer information in print or in paper rather than online. So you can order How to Avoid a Scam, Scams in Your Small Business, and How to Spot, Avoid, and Report Identity Theft in Your Language in print at ftc.gov/bulk order. These are available in Simplified Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, along with English and Spanish. These publications are designed to help people and businesses spot, avoid, and report scams and identity theft too. You can order them for free and have them shipped for free through the bulk order site. I want to remind everyone that the FTC's resources live in the public domain. There are no copyright concerns or permission needed to use our resources. The resources at ftc.gov/languages we hope can help many communities spread the word about how to spot, avoid, and report scams. And we hope that communities will use and share the resources, and that you will share them as a trusted resource with your communities. We want to thank you for coming today and for helping us share the information. Back to you, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you so much. One question I posed to our first two speakers, I will pose to you as a veteran of these annual data reports. What surprised you in today's data book annual report?
Thank you, Sandy. I share the same reaction as Lois and Maria. I'm very surprised to see that email is the #1 contact method. It seems that so much of our technology has moved to text messages or phones, so that was a surprise to me. And also the volume, the 10 billion in losses, surprised me.
Is there, I mean, that presents itself as a real question. To what extent does $10 billion, it's very hard to know how to compare that to other let's say, underground economy activities like the drug trade. It's enormous, 10 billion, but I don't have any other reference points to compare it to. Is there any that you can think of? Lois, Maria, Jennifer, Larissa? This $10 billion represents an enormous amount of money.
Yes, and we constantly refer to it as the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
Surveys have shown that less than 5% report to either the government or a Better Business Bureau.
Wow.
Less than 5%.
Than 5%. I mean, that is in itself a huge scam economy, if you want to look at it that way. Larissa, a question for you. Social media is the initial contact method used in many scams. Where does it go from a social media post? Does it then sort of get information and call the person? Can you give us a kind of sense of what the trail is after an initial social media contact?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I invite Lois and Maria to chime in as well. You know, I think like any scam, it may start with a point of contact and it may develop into others, but I can think of a scenario like Lois talked about the business imposter, and Maria mentioned too, where perhaps the scam begins on social media and it's the first entry point of contact in an imposter scam, for example, where someone pretends to be someone they're not, and they may contact someone via social media, let's say even a platform, pretending to be someone that they aren't. And, you know, the scam goes from there. It could be a job scam, for example. It could be a posting that comes in through social media that appears to be a job of, you know, recruiting for a legitimate company. But in reality, it's a scammer trying to earn the trust of you or I for us to believe that they are who they say they are. And in the end, what they want is our financial or personal information.
Yeah.
Yeah, the top subcategory for frauds that started on social media is online shopping. So someone may see an ad for a particular item and then they may purchase that item and never receive it. That's the main category where we see consumers are first initiated through social media.
And one last question, because before I go to our questions on the chat, prizes, sweepstakes, and lotteries were among the top 5. How does an imposter or how does that work as a scam? You suddenly are told you have a prize. Can you give us an example of a typical prize, sweepstake, or lottery scam?
Just as you said, Sandy, someone may receive a call indicating that they won a prize, but in order to get the prize money, they have to pay for insurance or some type of fee in order to get that sweepstakes or prize.
And literally $338 million in losses, an increase over 2022. So that appears to be a rising category of scams. Let's go to our questions on the chat. Henrietta Burrows, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks, Sandy. Nigerian scammers used to be in the lead when it came to scams, but we don't hear about them anymore. Have they been shut down?
Who wants to take that on? Lois? Okay.
I don't think it's so much that they've been shut down, it's that they've moved on to a different scam. The cachet of the Nigerian scam I think it has outlived its vitality. It's probably still out there, but we rarely hear of it. Instead, we're hearing, as Maria said, about the impersonation of your bank, or as Sandy's very example gave with her accountant.
Wow. I want to ask Elena Kuznetsova from Slavic SAC. You have a number of questions on the chat, but your most recent one asks about what happens when you respond to an email and suddenly a whole lot of other people are suddenly contacting you on your email. Do you want to ask a very specific question about that?
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, I want to ask a question. It's because I some time ago read information that some organizations do sell our data and we cannot really track it. We cannot understand. The thing is that whenever we insert our email, whenever we leave it, very soon we receive different messages, calls, emails with anything, can be legal business and can be definitely fake offers. So how can we fight with that? How can we make it safe for us to leave our emails? Because for example, I cannot have millions of emails just for like shopping or for anything. Thank you so much.
Lois?
I can start. So each commercial email, and by commercial, I mean an email that's trying to sell you something, is supposed to have an opt-out link. We actually sued Experian earlier this year, the credit reporting company, for failing to have an opt-out link on its commercial emails. Scammers rarely have opt-out links as a practical matter. They're not going to comply with the law. Some people actually do, as you suggested, use different email addresses for different types of online activity, by using one email address, so that if it gets inundated because the merchant you've bought from has sold or shared your email address, so that you have some sense of, okay, maybe it was this merchant, I'm never going to go to this merchant again. If they contact me, I will unsubscribe.
There's an important, thank you for these responses. There is an important question, and I just scrolled over it. Here it is. It's very timely, from Raymond Tyler. Raymond, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Ooh, turn that video off.
No, we like to.
Great. With the election season coming up, have you seen any significant either uptake or any significant amount of election fraud with regards to phone, email, things of that nature?
You're speaking about political donations?
Political donations, yes.
Oh. It's an interesting question.
So I'll take the first shot at it. We don't actually track that because the Federal Trade Commission does not regulate in any way political speech. But it's happening. I mean, we're reading about it in the papers. It happened in New Hampshire. And this is one of the big concerns with deep fakes and voice cloning.
Wow. Well, we have 5 minutes left, and we have such great experts on this call. I want to ask each of you, well, I could ask the classic question of what should our headline be, but I'm also very intrigued to know where you think we're making headway. You have invested great resources and time in ethnic media outreach and in general in communications, because you argue that information is the great antidote to scams. If people know, if they read stories, if they hear from each other, if they tell each other what's going on, that information network is probably the most effective sort of guardian or barrier to scam. But what do you see as sort of positive indicators that communications are helping? The tide keeps growing, but maybe it could have grown a lot faster. I'm not sure. I would love to ask the final question from each of you. Where do you feel there is some progress, especially via communications, which is really our business, our call to action? Let's start with Maria Mayo.
I think as we continue, Lois mentioned that one of the reasons why consumers should report and what do we do with the information is because it helps with law enforcement initiatives, but it also helps to get the word out to folks about what they should look for, in particular frauds and scams. And I think continuing in that effort to educate consumers, and as you mentioned, passing that information along to others is a good way to help deter some of this activity.
So there was, or where do you see in the data indication that the public is becoming more informed? In some ways, the fact that people are not answering phone calls because they're afraid of being scammed is a sign of growing public awareness. But we'd love to hear, maybe if not where you see signs of progress, where you see us playing the most important role in educating our audiences. Lois.
It's a tough question, Sandy. I mean, knowledge is power. And that's where you all have the power to communicate the knowledge. I mean, we see it in some surveys that are taken. We see it in talking to people, talking to industry. Industry is incredibly proud when they stop somebody from being scammed, but it's a two-way street. The person also has to know something. They get their information from you. That's what we hear time and time again. One data point that I do look at that shows, you just said people aren't, excuse me, answering their phone. Our volume of robocall complaints has plummeted. We were near 1 million a month. We're now 1 to 200,000 a month. By no means does that mean the problem is solved, but I do think that means people are savvier.
Right. So very, very helpful. And lastly, Larissa, where do you see progress, and what is your call to action for us as media communicators?
Thank you for the question, Sandy. In terms of, well, I'll start with, where do I see progress? I think the fact that the reports haven't grown a lot is progress. We know that the dollar amount lost has gone up, but I think if you look at the categories, some of that is attributable to 1 or 2 categories where there are significant losses, like investment scams, for example. I think the median loss is about $500 per person. Where do I think we can go, and what is my call to action? I think it's what we've been talking about. We know that research shows that people are more apt to listen to trusted resources, trusted people that they trust, like all of you on this call. And we know that the information about scams is getting out there through you and your channels. And it is imperative that that continues, because while the scammers are really good at what they do, I think we can be better. Knowledge, as Lois said, is power. As we share awareness and talk about scams and how to spot them and detect them, and we share that with our communities, people are better prepared to have the red flag, go out, the light bulb moment where they recognize this doesn't sound right. The person contacting me through whatever method is trying to scam me. So the best thing we can do is try to share what we know. So encourage people, please, to report what they see and experience. It is so important to both our law enforcement efforts as well as our education efforts. It's how we will bring cases and how we know what to share with the public about scams to look out for. So we very much appreciate your help with this, and thank you so much for being here today.
Well, our great thanks on behalf of all my media colleagues and I. Several messages in the chat referenced how helpful this briefing has been. And I think all of us have a huge stake in this topic. So we thank you personally, and we thank you on behalf of our audiences for coming with this new set of data hot off the press. My thanks to everyone for joining, and we are now at the hour, so our conference is closed.